Race for the top seat at the Law Society of Kenya certainly was heated up this evening as presidential hopefuls faced off in a crucial debate at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. Let's now cross over to our team on the ground for a deeper analysis. Michelle Ngele Odhiambo, what stood out, who appears to have carried the night, and what are your analysts or panelists saying this evening?
Good evening, Zainab. It is here at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa where for 2 hours this evening, the three candidates seeking to lead the Law Society of Kenya, Charles Kanjama, Peter Wanyama and Maura Kabata, faced off in a presidential debate on the issues facing the Law Society of Kenya. The election set for the 19th of February is one that will determine the direction of the Law Society of Kenya at a crucial time as the country heads and prepares for the 2027 general election. And now that the debate is over, Zainab, there's only one question tonight: who carried the debate and why? Well, joining us tonight for this post-debate analysis is constitutional lawyer and governance analyst Willis Otieno. And we also have Christine Lai, the first female chairperson of ICJ Kenya. Thank you both for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been quite an interesting debate. I saw the candidates making their positioning very clear. Peter Wanyama, for example, called for a strengthened bar. We had Maura Kabata saying the core function of LSK should be service to members. And then, of course, we had Charles Kanjama presenting himself perhaps as the most independent candidate of the race. Christine, let me begin with you. Who had the strongest night tonight and why?
Well, I would say each of the candidates put forward the presentation of their independent and individual track records. We were able to interrogate through the debate the questions around integrity, independence, and their transformative vision for the society. But as we'll be getting into the debate, I think our interest largely is to look at each of their track record as the leader of a collective society. Not so much just for the members, the advocates for whom they will be representing, but for the nation, especially as we now get into a critical moment towards the elections and still an unfulfilled promise of the transformative vision of our Constitution.
All right, Willis, who do you think are the strongest night tonight? It's interesting that Christine says that because one of the candidates, Maura Kabata, was very clear that the function of LSK should solely be service to members.
You know, one thing I can say, for me, it's straightforward. Maura Kabata had the night for the simple reason that when you look at the two seniors who are with him, they spend too much time on counter-attacking each other. They are not addressing the core issue that concerned the people of Kenya and the members of the Law Society of Kenya. Too much debate minutes were spent on personal attacks. He did, she did, he did, who he represents, who doesn't represent. So they were reducing the quality of the debate, denying the Kenyan people an opportunity to interrogate further the core issues that care to them. These are live debates, for crying out loud. You cannot reduce it to the internal bedroom issues or kitchen issues of the Law Society of Kenya that the Kenyan people don't care about. The Kenyan people care about a functioning society, a society in which the rule of law is respected, there is constitutionalism, and that they have confidence that when it's required, you have a law society that will be able to stand up and speak for them. And more so, when you are approaching an election year, I was expecting even more of the debate to focus on the rule of law, the question of extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, the experience of our young people, the Gen Z, when they went out to actualize the Article 37 rights. That was the base. That's what the role of the Law Society of Kenya in the last 2 years has been so central in putting the government to check, to ensure that we protect our democratic space and our constitution. But when a debate is reduced to you represent who, you are paid this much, you did this, then now, of what concern is that to the poor young man who is sitting in Kisumu, who is dealing with a case of an enforced disappearance? That does not matter to the people of Kenya. And that is why, for me, to the extent that Kabata resisted the temptation to go deep and delve deep into the mundane issues of who you represent, who you act for, and try to focus the debate on issues that affect the members of the society and the wider public, I will call this debate for him.
All right. Christine, The race seems to have been framed around three main expectations. One is economic protection and more welfare protection for members of the LSK. There's also issues of institutional reform and also having a strong national voice. But there seemed to be a debate as to whether the LSK should go forward with having a strong national voice or look more inward towards member welfare. And another debate as to whether then it could juggle the two and try to rebalance them. Which direction for you came through most clearly tonight?
The clearest direction was one that was focused on the members, the welfare of the members and service. There were smatterings of the role that the society needs to play with regard to the rule of law and its public posturing. However, it's important to remind ourselves of the law, the statutory obligations under which the Law Society of Kenya is established, and for which, in fact, each of these individuals who are today presenting themselves to be elected as president would need to lead. So they're not simply going to be leading advocates who perhaps practice in the traditional practice areas or welfare, which is also critical, but they have a higher calling. And that higher calling is one that is critical at this juncture for our country. And it's not a by the way. It's actually embedded in the Law Society of Kenya Act that all of these obligations are part and parcel of what the leadership of the Law Society of Kenya is required to look into. And so as we come to this critical moment, we're coming from a period, as Willis has just mentioned, where the Law Society of Kenya has led in action, has demonstrated that what is actually possible when we have a bar that is courageous, when we have a bar that stands up with a people-centered and a human rights-based approach. And remember that advocates and lawyers exist within the socio-political and economic reality of our country, yet also play a very critical role in helping to advance the economic justice vision that we have in the Constitution, electoral justice vision, good governance, constitutionalism, which is yet to be fulfilled. We're still quite far from where we have to be. And so it has to be clear that as a law society, the mandate that the leadership council carries, the president as well as the council, is one that bears an obligation to its members and equally to the nation of Kenya, to the people, to the public. And we must be able to play both these roles in equal measure and with similar fortitude across the board.
All right, and of course, a crucial factor in balancing those two then is independence. And Willis, you have many times warned publicly about attempts to influence or perhaps even capture the Law Society of Kenya on different platforms. From what you heard tonight, did any candidate convince you that they can resist the pressure, or should members be worried?
The first thing I must say is this. The temptation to turn Law Society of Kenya into a trade union must be rejected. The Law Society of Kenya is a trade union. That will leave to Kotu and Atuoli. The functions of the Law Society of Kenya, its objectives are found in Section 4 of the Act. And you cannot run away from the core function the society plays in terms of advice to the government and protecting public interest. Those are its functions. That's why it exists. So that I get sad when a debate is reduced to be purely about lawyers' welfare. Bread and butter issue. What is bread and butter issue to a lawyer when the society itself that you're functioning has collapsed? You cannot shy away from addressing those global national challenges that even lawyers as members of the Kenyan society are facing them. So for me, I will say, in terms of the candidates, one thing that the members must look out for is when the number one breacher of human rights, or fundamental rights, is the state. In fact, many a times, the state becomes the defendant. It's always the number one culprit in terms of violation of fundamental rights. You must ask of the three candidates, based on their past records and their individual engagements with organs of government, who can stand up to speak, to defend the Constitution and the rule of law, of the three of them. Because we cannot run away from the facts. The point is, we cannot run away from...
On how far the Law Society can go in national, political, and governance issues without blurring independence.
The point is this: the northern star that guides the society is the Constitution. That's all. And if you look at the previous council, that is the outgoing council, they were very focused on addressing the questions of human rights violations, the questions of the constitution. They didn't delve into the political question that the national politicians were engaging in. They were very focused primarily on these young people have gone out to demonstrate. They have a right to demonstrate. The constitution gives them that right. If they are arrested, they have a right to legal representation. They have a right to go to court. Very clear. But you don't need a leadership, in my view, at the society, that based on their personal, because what you're going to bring into office is personal bias to now tamper with the professional role. So that if I have too many interlocutors in the executive, and that executive is the number one violator of fundamental rights, how am I going to use the platform of the Law Society of Kenya to call my interlocutors to order? Is there conflict? And even if I wanted to speak with 2 decibels of my voice, I'll only use 1 decibel. I'll try to turn a blind eye to some of those violations. These are live issues, and this year and next year, we're in a critical stage in our country. We cannot turn a blind eye that we're going to have elections. We don't know if our young people will go back to the street to demonstrate, even before that next year. What will the Law Society of Kenya presidents say when they are abducted, when they are killed extrajudicially, when they are disappeared? We need a president of the Law Society of Kenya who will have the confidence and the competence to speak loudly and say, what you are doing is contrary to the Constitution. I didn't hear loud murmurs on that in the room, because then it meant that probably people have now reduced the stature of the society to be purely about bread and butter issues.
All right.
And that, to me, will be a sad day for the Law Society of Kenya and the Kenyan nation.
I guess it's perhaps important to note that many of the questions shaping this election are closely tied to the legacy that the outgoing president of the Law Society of Kenya, Faith Odhiambo, also leaves. So let's talk about that Faith Odhiambo legacy question, Christine. Because as you mentioned, under her tenure, the Law Society of Kenya for the last 3 years has been a more visible voice, institutional voice on national issues, issues of public interest. Now, some have criticized that as being a political activist. Others have said it is leading with integrity. But from what you heard tonight, are candidates promising to continue with that approach, or is this election in effect a referendum of the activist era of the Law Society of Kenya, in your view?
Thank you. You know, let's go back to history and remember luminaries such as Senior Counsel Paul Muite, the late Senior Counsel Feroz Noroji, Senior Counsel Gitobwe Manyara. Leaders of the Law Society of Kenya have time and again been called to play a significant role in advancing good governance, democracy, rule of law, and constitutionalism for Kenya. Faith Odhiambo, in her tenure, stood up and owned that role. And we've had presidents who've done that in the past. What we're asking, what we're hoping to see of the next leadership of the Law Society of Kenya is, for us in the human rights sector, ICJ Kenya and many others in the sector, we're looking for a partner. We're looking for a partner that we can rely on to be independent, to be bold, to stand up when it matters. And the question of standing up when it matters is not a rhetorical one. When you put collectively the trends that we have already been seeing over the past 2, 3, 4 years since the past election, whether it be, you're seeing a system, a political system that is resistant to that transformative vision that we as a people have said we want to see. And the question that now begs is, in every sphere where each of us is called upon to serve, and in this case, the Law Society of Kenya, each of us as individual advocates and human rights lawyers, what will we do to advance it? And the threshold then becomes higher for the Law Society of Kenya because it is anchored in the law that establishes the Law Society of Kenya. And that, in fact, distinguishes the Law Society of Kenya from several other societies because they bear a legal responsibility. So to conclude, what we want to see is a law society that will deal with the matters that our times call for. And the key questions are clear. It's questions around electoral justice. It's questions around accountability for political violence. It's questions around balancing between judicial independence and judicial accountability, access to justice for marginalized communities, and by and large, protection of the Bill of Rights. And we hope that the next president will take on the baton and do even better than their predecessors.
Willis, what's your take on those who say this could be a referendum on the activist style or activist era of LSK?
You know, I'm one person who will give Faith Odhiambo her flowers when she's alive. Because Faith stood up when she was called upon. Because the period that we were going through for the last 2 years with our young people for the first time finding their voices, and mobilized by any politician, but mobilized by the economic pain. And the state acted in the manner in which it did, the manner it knows best, in a very repressive and oppressive manner. Faith Odhiambo and her council managed to be the beacon of hope that stood for the people who are oppressed, who did not have anybody in the political class that they could turn up to. And that, to me, is something that we must say kudos to. And if anybody calls the activist days, it was activism for the benefit of the country. And it was in furtherance of the Section 4 objectives of the Law Society of Kenya. It is not wrong to be an activist for as long as you are doing your activism to advance the cause of justice, the rule of law, and the Constitution. I always find it strange that legacy politicians like throwing this term activism as if to be an activist is a bad thing. It is not. Those are people who have been caught with their hands in the cookie jar, trying to now make you feel shy of wearing the badge of honor that comes with defending the Constitution. Faith Odhiambo and her council valiantly defended the Constitution. And even if you look at some of those who had been forcefully disappeared, it took the Law Society of Kenya's voice and activism that saved lives. Right. People like Bob Njagi, the Linton brothers, Mwambili, so many of them had been disappeared. But when the Law Society of Kenya took up these cases and maintained the public pressure, the conversation about these people who had been disappeared, the state had to respond and that released them. So it saved lives and it protected our Constitution. That to me is an era that we have to celebrate. And if you ask me as an advocate, individually, at my individual level, I will want a society that will protect not only the lawyer, the advocate, but will also protect the Kenyan. Because lawyers exist to serve the society. If our clients are being killed, if our clients are being abducted, you have no business serving as an advocate in this country.
Very well said, Willis. We must wind up this conversation. So much more to discuss, including the figures the candidates quoted as having spent on their campaigns. But is constitutional lawyer and governance analyst Willis Otieno. We've also been speaking to Christine Lai. She is the first female chairperson of the International Commission of Jurists Kenya, commonly known as ICJ Kenya. And that brings us to the end of a long but important night here at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. The choice now lies with the voters who will go to the polls on the 19th of February. On behalf of the entire Nation Media Group team on location, our moderators, producers, technical crew, and everyone who made this broadcast a reality, thank you for being part of this national conversation. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. Let's take you on break and back to normal programming. Good evening.